On behalf of the family, I welcome you to this space to honor and remember Joseph Bloomer, MD, who most of us knew as Joe. Your presence today speaks volumes to the life he led and whose hearts he touched. For those who are here, for those who could not be here, we give thanks for all who touched Joe's life and those who remember and carry on his legacy. Later in the service, you will be invited to come forward and share a memory or story of your time with Joe. And so I invite you to start bringing those memories to mind now. If Lindsay would please come forward to light our chalice. We light this flame as our fervent plea to brighten the dark corners of our hearts. We hold this flame, for in it is the promise of warmth for souls grown cold in loss and despair. We kindle this light that we might continue to find comfort in its warmth, strength in its light, holiness in its presence. We follow this light that it might illuminate our search for purpose, for meaning, and forgiveness. We light this chalice knowing, even as this sacred spark of life is extinguished, in the ensuing darkness, its light, Joe's light, will still burn bright with all the memory and hope of its all too brief flash across our lives. We light this flame of life, of love, and truth for the divine promise of healing hearts. May it be so. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what has been planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. For Joe Bloomer, the end is here. Joe shared much love between his wife, Anne, their children, Jennifer and Jeff, his grandchildren, his siblings, his extended family, his friends, his colleagues, and all in his community. All of you gathered here physically, and all of you gathered with us online. We gather this day to honor the person he was, to praise his accomplishments, to remember his whole person, and to support one another on the journey of grief which began even before he died. We never have enough time with those we love. Joe's family and friends certainly mourn his loss. We come together today with tears and joy and laughter to pay respects to the life of Joe Bloomer. Let us take a moment to remember Joe's life through pictures and song. Please join me in our collective remembering of Joe by responsively reading together as found in your order of service. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember him. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember him. In the blueness of the sky and the warmth of summer, we remember him. In the rustling of leaves and the beauty of autumn, we remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember him. In unison, so long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him.
Just as long as vision lasts, I must answer yes to truth. In my dream and in my dark, always that elusive spark. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to truth. Just as long as my heart beats, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment pierced me through, still I keep on loving you. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to love.
Please join me in the spirit of meditation, followed by a moment of silence. Spirit of life and death, our grief is a holy thing. It is that proof that another life touched ours in a profound way. It is the mark of love, the mark of connection, the mark of a life well lived. Energy that has been created cannot be destroyed. We will mourn, we will cry, we will miss Joe. Time will move on, and we may not hurt like we hurt now, but then a thought or a bit of music or a smell will remind us of him, and it will all come back. Those moments, too, are holy. They're reminders of that connection that will never fully go away. It's important to hold on to that connection because it is through those memories that Joe stays with us. In our memories of him, that love and connection stay alive, and with it, a part of Joe. We share some of those memories today. Hold on to these memories. Tell the stories that make you smile, the stories that make you laugh. Share the memories with people who knew Joe and people who didn't. May they remind you of the beauty of Joe's life, of his passion and his connection to us. And may it bring us peace on this day. Amen, and blessed be. Our reading this afternoon is by an author named Starhawk. We are all longing to go home to some place we have never been, a place half remembered and half envisioned we can only catch glimpses of from time to time. Community. Somewhere, there are people to whom we can speak with passion without having the words catch in our throats. Somewhere, a circle of hands will open to receive us. Eyes will light up as we enter. Voices will celebrate with us whenever we come into our own power. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that needs to be done. Arms to hold us when we falter, a circle of healing, a circle of friends, someplace where we can be free and whole. As the eldest of 5, Joseph Bloomer was born in Rockville, Indiana, the son and grandson of doctors. His grandfather's office was built during the Civil War and served the community for generations, so much so that his office is now a historical landmark because, of all things, it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Joe knew that his legacy was important to pay forward. He knew that all people deserved dignity and respect, a value he would hold throughout his life. Joe matriculated at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with all intentions of carving his own path and majoring in engineering. But he soon learned, via the horrendous Friday quizzes, that medicine was a better choice for him. Joe was stymied by technology, especially by remote controls and computers, for the rest of his life. But he also found much comfort in the robotic dog and gifted him as a companion in the midst of his illness. Joe's switch to medicine unveiled his brilliance. He attended Western Reserve for medical school, graduating at the top of his class and a member of the Honor Society. He did his residency in San Francisco, then worked for the National Institutes of Health, Yale Medical School, the University of Minnesota, and finally landed just down the street at UAB, where he was the director of the Liver Center, among many other responsibilities and accomplishments. Throughout his career, Joe was known to be compassionate and committed to his staff and his patients, a mentor of all, supportive of women in medicine. His career was an important part of his identity, but there was much more to Joe than just being a world expert in porphyrias, or the inherited form of liver disease, but he was also a world expert in porphyrias, and I hope I'm saying that right. Toward the end of medical school, Joe was at a Halloween party where Anne was conveniently in attendance. She has a pretty elaborate backstory for how she and Joe both ended up at this Halloween party conveniently. And during a frantic game of bobbing for apples, Anne noticed the handsome Joe bent over trying to get his teeth into an apple. And during the next activity, where partygoers were passing an orange between their necks, have you played it? You know that weird, very weird game, very intimate game. Anne ensured that she was standing next to Joe for that game. Now, I'm not going to say that sparks flew, but they did, because after that party, they dated for a month. Joe proposed and accepted, and their love continued to blossom for 56 years. When Jennifer and Jeff were born, Joe was so excited to be a father, and you'll hear Jennifer's perspective in a few minutes. He loved his kids and his grandkids for all their accomplishments and successes, large or small. He was thrilled when Anne went back to school to become a teacher and an award-winning author, which I want to ask her about later. He was thrilled when Jennifer and Kendra were accepted into medical school, and he loved seeing his family pursue whatever their passions were. Joe loved being active. He played sports with his kids. He ran in the New York and Boston marathons, and he finished the New York marathon in under 3 hours. He loved dancing with Anne, although he had no rhythm, but together they figured it out, and they danced through life together. Joe and Anne loved to travel to various places through the MIT alumni program. They loved to watch sports together, especially basketball, and were boosters of the UMN Golden Gophers and UAB Black Blazers men's basketball. Joe and his family loved family camping trips and the adventures therein, and he even dressed up as Dumbledore for his granddaughter's Harry Potter birthday party, which was on the slideshow if you saw him with the very long beard. Joe knew how to have fun. Joe had a zest for life and loved to laugh. He loved playing pranks on his siblings, on his neighbors, and even Anne. He loved jokes and singing rhymes, which he continued to create even as the dementia set in. Joe's passion for life was multiplied because as a doctor, he knew how short life could be and the unexpected turns life could take by listening to his patients' stories and watching their health unfold, and through the untimely death of his son, Jeff. Joe's past couple of years were frustrating to him as he slowly lost parts of his identity. But as Unitarian Universalists, we respect and appreciate all the parts of our lives, all the pieces that make us who we are. But as frustrating as his illness was for him, Joe never lost that part of him that loved other people. When he went into the CARES Senior Center, it was as if he was running for office, waving, smiling, greeting everyone. And every morning, without fail, he would run and hug and kiss Anne, or wheel over to her, even when he couldn't remember who she was. Joe's brilliance for the majority of his life highlights the severity of Alzheimer's, a puzzle of Joe's legacy left to the next generation of doctors to solve. Joe has taught and mentored you well. Joe's life is an example to us all of someone who enjoyed life and enjoyed the people who he loved, who lived out his calling by caring for others and teaching others to do the same. Joe took life seriously in all the right places and ensured his joy was palpable to all he met. May we continue to remember and honor Joe this afternoon as we move into the space where we hear from others. I'd like to invite Brendan forward for our first remembrance. Brendan?
Before I make my comments, I want to share the following. On behalf of the Porphyrias Consortium, the American Porphyrias Expert Collaborative, and the United Porphyrias Association, we send our greetings and sympathies to Ann Bloomer and Joe's family, and our regrets that we could not be here at the memorial to celebrate the life and contributions of our special colleague and dear friend, Joe Bloomer. He was an outstanding scientist and researcher and a compassionate physician who devoted his career to understanding the cause of various genetic diseases, and in particular, the inherited porphyrias. As a critical and devoted member of the Porphyria Consortium and the American Porphyria Expert Collaborative, he worked tirelessly to carry out basic research, clinical studies, and drug trials to understand, to treat, and improve the lives of porphyria patients worldwide. He was a devoted supporter of the porphyria advocacy groups, the American Porphyria Foundation, and the United Porphyrias Association. We will miss his wisdom, enthusiasm, guidance, and friendship. Signed, Robert Desnick, Herb Bonkowski, Monty Bissell, Carl Anderson, John Phillips, Manisha Balwani, Hitanshi Nayak, Bruce Wang, and Kristen Whedon. Anne, Jen, Peter, Lindsay, and your sisters, thank you for inviting me today, for sharing your husband, father, and grandfather with us throughout his incredible medical career. For Joe, being a doctor was not just a job, it was his vocation. It was a vocation that required support from the entire family. And you supported him every step of the way. Jen, Joe was extremely proud of you when you were the first author and published with him an article in the American Journal of Medical Genetics on porphyria, of course. I am sure during the editing phase of this paper, your dad used his black Sharpie and blue pen to edit your paper like he did with me numerous times. Usually, Joe would cross out about 90% of my text, and then with his blue pen, write a shorter and more concise version of what I was trying to get across to the readers. At first, it was embarrassing as to how poorly I was as a writer. But really, after time, it got better, and I became a better writer, such that our last paper together, Joe only crossed out about half of my text with 3 black Sharpies and added his blue pen to shorten the paper by about 50%. This was the only paper I ever had or will have accepted without any revisions from the publisher. If Joe is able to thank everyone who made him successful, it would start with his parents, who gave him a strong foundation as he grew up in Rockville, Indiana, and allowed him to travel to Boston to go to MIT. He would also thank his wife, Anne, the love of his life for 56 years, for always they did together for raising their great children, Jen and Jeff. And thank Anne always for being there, even when he had Alzheimer's. And he would want his grandkids to know how much he loved them and enjoyed watching them growing up into outstanding people. To Joe, family was so important to him. His well-being and success in the medical career started with a supportive family. Joe's scientific accomplishments were many and born out of his incredible passion for work. All of us can say we're passionate at what we do, but Joe took it to a different level. Even his license plate was capital L-I-V-E-R. That license plate made him easy to spot on Highway 280. His passion was on display on his car and everything he did, and his passion was infectious. It rubbed off on me when I met Joe as a young resident at the University of Minnesota. To us residents, Joe was a liver god, and I was in awe of his achievement and inquisitive nature. Not only did he ask the questions, he probed and researched to find solutions. His research identified a gene defect associated with one of the porphyrias. He identified how porphyria is toxic to the liver and assisted in the development of one of its first treatments. His work was truly life-changing for thousands and thousands of people around the world faced with this rare but debilitating disease and so many other types of liver diseases. So after completing my training in Minnesota, when I had a chance to follow Joe to UAB, I strong-armed my wife, Liz, to move to Alabama. Thanks, Liz. At UAB, Joe started the Liver Center, which has had a profound impact on patients throughout the Southeast. He continued his groundbreaking research in porphyria, but his passion to work nationally and internationally as president of the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease in 1999, which is the largest liver organization in the world. Joe was a respected leader, renowned researcher, but most importantly, he was a teacher. Joe taught me and so many others about liver disease, but his greatest lesson was on how to treat others. Joe cared for every patient and their family members with dignity and compassion. He interacted with colleagues with respect, and he believed that there should be no divisiveness in medicine. We are all on one team dedicated to advancing medicine and caring for patients and one another. If Joe grew impatient or frustrated, which at times he did, it was only because he wanted the best of all of us. And the best began with how we treated one another. The last time I saw Joe was just a few weeks before he passed away. Joe was confined to a wheelchair and not able to communicate verbally, but he could listen. His eyes still sparkled, and he still had the joyful grin, especially when I talked about basketball or porphyria. When Liz and I told Joe that we needed to leave, he tried to get up out of the chair to walk to the door. That simple act, who Joe was first and foremost a true gentleman, courteous, polite, and respectful. We will miss you, Joe, but I'm so thankful for the opportunity to have learned from your example. Your scientific accomplishments will forever advance medicine, but your greatest impact on me and so many others will be your quiet determination, humility, and kindness. The only thing Joe did not get to edit was my speech today. If he could use his Sharpie marker just one more time, the speech would have ended a few minutes ago. But it seemed fitting to take time to honor Joe, Ann, and your entire family for the far-reaching impact on so many of us. I know I will speak for so many to say how grateful we are. Thank you.
I now invite Jennifer Bloomer-Jeans to come forward.
Hello. Thank you everyone for coming today to honor and celebrate my father. It's challenging to sum up a life and relationship in a few minutes, but I will try my best to capture some essence of who my dad was and what he meant to me. It has been so hard to watch as dementia has stolen away his personality, speech, and independence over the past 5 years. I want to thank my mom for being such a wonderful caregiver. She sacrificed so much to be able to keep him at home with the help of his other amazing caregivers until he passed away. And then, although my dad was sometimes in pain or could get frustrated with not being able to fully function, he remained a sweet person who was still very much in love with my mom. In his last year, he would forget at times that Anne was his wife, but finding her a lovely, kind, and attractive lady, several times he proposed that they should get married. She said yes. I was recently looking through my bookshelf and I came across one of my dad's favorite books called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's a wonderful book. I fondly remember him reading this to me as a child. It tells the story of a seagull who grew bored with the mundane life of the flock and sought fulfillment and meaning through perfecting the art of flying. I think my dad loved this book not only because it tells a lovely tale, but also because it echoed his own life and values. He was incredibly dedicated to his career in medicine, perfecting his abilities as a doctor, in addition to being a loving husband and wonderful father. But also, like Jonathan the seagull, he had a sense of joy and fun while practicing his trade. My dad was obviously a huge role model to me as I also chose to pursue a career in medicine. He was overwhelmingly proud when I became the fourth generation of physicians in the family and the first female. He was so pleased when I got a summer job in his research lab and we were able to write that paper together, my only paper I've ever published, as Brendan mentioned. And it was published in a prestigious medical journal. Just last month, I received a notification that the article had been cited in another article, bringing back fond memories of discussing the data and editing the paper with Dad, and of course, the black Sharpie. I can still see that in my mind. And he was always available as a medical consultant for me when I came across a patient with liver or GI issues, and his advice was always, of course, spot on. Dad was always supportive of all my sporting endeavors. He came to as many of my basketball and soccer games as he could, and he even coached my rec basketball team one year. He was a great coach, just as he was a physician, always positive, and he ended each period with a pep talk saying, good quarter, girls." He would spend endless hours out in the driveway with me playing basketball game called Horse, and he was hard to beat, although I beat him sometimes. Later in life, I got into mountain bike racing, and Dad and my mom flew out to Colorado, and Dad and my husband supported on the sidelines of a particularly grueling race. This was no small task, given that he was 70 years old at the time. The event was held over 10,000 feet of elevation, started at 4:30 a.m. and ended at 6 p.m. But he cheered me on every time on the sidelines, saying, "Woohoo, way to go, Jen. Wow, she's something." I was so happy to finish, not only because I had achieved my goal, but even more so because I had made my dad proud. Although Dad was very committed to his career, he was at heart a funny and lighthearted person with a great sense of humor. He loved jokes and puns and gave everyone silly nicknames. He loved to play practical jokes, but was also a good sport when he was the victim. Observing that he often ate food absent-mindedly, I once put out a bowl of cat food on the counter, and he grabbed a handful as he walked by. When I laughingly told him what he had just eaten, he smiled and replied, not bad. Dad used to walk around the house singing bits of nonsensical rhyming songs. When his dementia became more pronounced and he started to have difficulty word finding, he would often try to express himself in joyful little bursts of song. Apparently, I have also inherited this tendency from my dad. Just the other day, one of the nurses at my hospital remarked on how I tend to walk around singing little ditties to myself. Maybe there's a gene for this. My dad was a wonderful grandfather to my 3 girls, and he and my mom loved to come and visit and watch them play sports and perform music. He also enjoyed taking the girls to the movies, although when he returned home, he never could quite describe the plot, so we suspected he probably fell asleep during the movie. He always did have a predilection for nodding off during quieter moments, We would look over and there would be Granddad sitting on the couch with his eyes closed. But he would wake up in a second and be willing to join in whatever game or tea party the girls wanted to play. He wasn't above sporting a tiara now and then, and even dressed up, as we mentioned, you saw, as Dumbledore the Wizard for a Harry Potter-themed birthday. Dad, I'm glad you're at peace now, after a life long and well-lived. I'm so grateful for your provision for our family and for being a wonderful father. Thank you for modeling the ideal physician who practiced medicine with passion and dedication. You instilled in me the values of pursuit of excellence while simultaneously elevating those around us. To quote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, "There's reason to life. We can lift ourselves out of ignorance. We can find ourselves as creatures of excellence and intelligence and skill."
Thank you, Jennifer. And now we open the floor for any of you who wish to share a story or a memory of Joe. I invite you to come forward to either microphone. Just be sure to speak into the microphone for the benefit of those watching online, which includes 2 of his grandchildren, and they definitely want to hear your stories. I'd also ask that you would introduce yourself for the benefit of all of us. One of the joys of a memorial service is that we bring together many different people across many different paths, so please introduce yourself before you share your story. Please come forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jimmy Lockett. I was blessed to be able to be included in Dr. Bloomer's family. There's two more of us, but the reason I say family is because Mrs. Bloomer had a phone call one day. I think it may have been her brother. And they were in the kitchen. No one else was in the kitchen but she and Dr. Bloomer. And she was on the phone, did not see me at all. I was coming up the hallway, and she was telling her brother, "We are a family of 4." I had to turn around because I was crying. And then I heard her tell someone else. We had another lady come on with us, and she said, "We are a family of 5." And I just want to say I thank you for including me into that family. Lord, it meant so much to me. And I consider it an honor to be helping a doctor as such. Dr. Bloomer was one awesome man. And I had some things written down, but I didn't bring them. But I do know it was a blessing to be able to help Dr. Bloomer and Mrs. Bloomer. I know I spent 6 nights a week. Every morning I'd wake up, I'd wake him up. He was always in a jolly mood. We'd sing together, and we'd get out of the bed after we got his eye drops and whatnot in. We'd get out of the bed, and we headed to the bathroom, but he's going to always stop and look toward the kitchen to see if he saw Mrs. Bloomer. And we would get dressed, and I would always tell him, say, "You're going to like the way you look." And he'd look in that mirror, and he'd have the biggest smile on his face. He made up songs. I never heard any of these songs he sang, but he made them up, and they always rhyme. It always floored me. But I tell you another thing. Dr. B, as I called him, was he was a genuine man. I know that for a fact simply because one night I was on the phone and I was talking to my wife, and I was telling her I love her and this and that. And when I hung up, he said, "I don't like that." I said, what is it you don't like, Dr. B? He said, "I don't like the fact that you got a girlfriend and you got a wife." I had to call her back and tell her to talk to him, just to let him know that I was faithful. Yeah, so there's so many other things that I could say, but it's just my mind is blocked now. We laughed a lot. If he wanted to stay up, I'd stay up with him, let him talk. I'd talk, he talked, we laughed all night long, sometimes. But I know I used to get there at 8:30 at night, and I'd talk to Mrs. Bloomer for a little while before I go back to the bedroom. And when I got back there, he was already up, headed toward the kitchen. I said, "Where you going?" "Going looking for you." So that let me know that he had some feelings for me, and I had deep feelings for him. But I mean, there's so many other things I'd like to say, but I just can't pull everything up now because I didn't bring everything that I had written down. I've been writing this for a month, but I do know it was an honor for us to be able to help Dr. Bloomer. I mean, I've been in the medical field for a long time at Children's Hospital, the VA hospital, and I've seen doctors. But the thing is, it was such a blessing for me to turn around and be of some assistance to an MD. That was such a blessing, and I will never, ever forget it. It was such an honor. I knew he was a gentleman. He's a gentleman because when I first met him, he stood up to shake my hand. That says a lot to me. I can see how genuine he was. And I respected that so much. He didn't have to do that, but he did. And he would always just have good, kind words to say to all of us. And when we talked to him, you never know that he had any type of problems. But with that being said, we went a long way. We've come through a lot together, the five of us. So I just say I miss him, and I shall continue missing him, and I consider it an honor to be able to be included in that family. Thank y'all so much.
I am Mohammed Shariba. I am one of the hepatologists at the UAB, and I am one of many that Dr. Bloomer positively impacted throughout the years. And I was born and raised in Egypt. I came to the UAB just to learn about liver diseases, so working with a legend like him was a dream coming true. I wanted to be well prepared before starting to work with him. So I asked someone that I trust, how should I prepare for rounding with Dr. Bloomer? He said, just walk next to him and you will learn. And it turned to be way more than the science that he excelled in. It turned to be a different level of manners and ethics, a different level of love and kindness that he shared with everyone. So it's been a privilege to work with him. Thank you.
I'm Peter Jeans, and I'm Jennifer's husband, and so Joe's son-in-law. And I really want to thank the previous two speakers also for contributing, because I didn't realize that my wife was going to talk about one of the same stories that I was going to talk about, even though I probably read her speech. But I didn't. I'm probably not as good an editor as Joe was, so I wasn't as attentive. But Joe was my father-in-law, and I first wanted to just thank him for being such a supportive and encouraging father-in-law. He always made time for us. We would visit them, they'd visit us, and I specifically remember so many wonderful, we live in Colorado, they'd come here from Alabama, and they stopped coming on Mother's Day because it always snows on Mother's Day in Colorado. But they started visiting annually in August, and we just had such wonderful visits, and he would make so much time for us. He would completely get away from work and be present with us. He wasn't always present because he'd also fall asleep on the couch like twice a day in the middle of the afternoon. They were legendary. So those are what I wanted to talk about were 4 characteristics that I most remember about Joe. Number 1 was his legendary napping ability. It was unbelievable and uncanny. Right about 1 o'clock, he would just be present, and all of a sudden the eyes would be shut, but he wouldn't move. It was unbelievable. He'd stay with it, and then about 20 minutes later, he'd just turn and say, "No, I was listening." We always thought, not so sure about that. His legendary napping ability. Second was his love of sports, and I'm a sports fanatic myself, and it was something that we really shared together. So occasionally, late at night, he and I would have these little sports powwows, and we'd stay up for an extra hour and lose some sleep and just talk about sports. But I can remember from the time that I met him when I was dating Jennifer, the first time I came to visit your family in Minnesota, we went to a Minnesota Twins game. I still remember that. I have pictures of that. He was a great fan of the Golden Gophers basketball team and got us hooked and got us into getting, when Jennifer was a medical student, we had season tickets to the Golden Gopher basketball team as well. And obviously then here down at UAB, he was fanatical about the Blazers as soon as he moved down here, especially their basketball team, but later also the football team. And the most passionate about sports that he really was actually about his grandkids' soccer teams. He would come out in August, and we'd almost always go to this one soccer tournament the girls be involved in, and he was crazy for their teams. So we'd go out and spend long days under the hot Colorado sun and watch their games. Huge fan. One thing that I just wanted to remember, and I actually asked for a quick visual aid. I think that our AV person is watching. So this picture, I'm going to have to walk around. Yeah, this is awesome. So that's not Joe. That happens to be a famous personality in Colorado. He actually ran for president in the last cycle in 2020. That's John Hickenlooper. He is the governor of Colorado. Joe was an unwitting spitting, like a doppelganger of the governor of Colorado. And there was one time, pretty much every time he'd come to games and we'd walk around our town, there would always be people just staring at us and looking at us. And we had one game where we took him to a Colorado Rapids professional soccer game. And Joe sat with me the whole time, and people kept coming over and taking pictures of us. Oops. And they thought that they pretty much were sure that and finally one of the members, like a parent of Lindsay on this soccer team, came over and they just said, "How do you know the governor?" I had no idea what they were talking about. Anyway, I guess you can take the picture down because we don't want to be memorializing our current sitting senator of Colorado, but thank you. Joe looked, he was a spitting image of Senator Hickenlooper and former governor. He loved sports. He also loved spending time with his granddaughters. He was a wonderful grandfather, really was. And some of my favorite memories, I'm going to try and tie it all together. And Jen started telling this story. We lived within walking distance of a cinema. You'd have to walk through a meadow and go up on a walk. And every summer in August, he would end up taking the youngest kids to a movie all by himself. And our favorite stories about this were, Joe was a great storyteller. And at the end of the movies, when they came home over dinner, they'd usually give us a synopsis of the film that they watched. And sometimes that made a lot of sense. Like if it was a movie that was kind of about sports or something like that, we thought there was like a really good synopsis of what was going on. Well, one time, this is the famous Ponyo story. There was a Japanese anime movie called Ponyo. So right away, this is not in Joe's wheelhouse. It's Japanese anime. The only person he attended it with was Lindsay, and at the time she was about 4 years old. So bringing up some of those characteristics back together, Joe's proclivity for napping, and also the fact that he really, really liked sports, and that this whole movie was about some kind of small Japanese characters, we're pretty sure he napped through the whole thing, and all we had left to tell the story was between a 4-year-old and Joe. So we have no idea what this movie is about, and later if you'd like to tell any of us what this movie is about, I think we would all profit from that. Thank you very much. But he loved spending time, and he was so proud of you guys, Lindsay and Kendra and Lauren. I know you're listening as well. He's so proud of you guys and loved to spend time with you. Joe, you've earned that nap. You've earned that nap, and I'm glad you're having a good long one. Thanks, Ann, for sharing him with us.
Would anyone else wish to share? Okay. I encourage you to continue the story sharing as we honor and remember Joe. After our closing words and the extinguishing of our chalice this afternoon, please stay seated until the family has time to form a receiving line to greet you in the back of the sanctuary. Chip will give us some accompaniment to help with that. May Joe's life and memory be blessed. May we celebrate the joy of life and express our love to each other fully and repeatedly. May we remember the legacies that we are creating right now that will be left behind when we are gone. May we remember to take life seriously when we hold another's life in our hands, but not too seriously the rest of the time. May we all be compassionate for all those who we associate with and meet as over the course of our lives. Remember Joe's joy. Remember Joe's compassion. Lindsay, if you'd like to come forward. For those who came before us, we offer gratitude and thanks. May their memories be a blessing. May we feel surrounded by their love. As we go forth from this time and place, let us be inspired by their courage, their wisdom, and their dreams. Let us honor Joe by doing the work of living boldly, loving mightily, and creating heaven on earth. Amen and blessed be.